Hello and welcome to this week's Churchyard Ramble. I am Jeff Richards, and this week I'm going to ramble on about roads and how the proximity of London really has shaped the growth of Sutton up until the coming of the railway. And so I am going to call a line. Draw a line underneath what I can talk about, and that is I shall go from earliest times to around about 1864, and I'm not really going to talk about then the development of Sutton after the railways have appeared, and the reason that I'm talking about this will come clear in a moment, but first of all, let's explain who I am. I'm Jeff Richards. I'm one of the trustees of the Friends of St. Nicholas Churchyard, and these are the ongoing virtual rambles to talk about the history of Sutton. We can't meet up inside the churchyard. We still have the need to be very mindful, to be alert about our need to take care and to socially isolate as well. Well, we have another fine day. It would be great. It is a historic period of time that we're living through, so it is an entirely appropriate thing that we should be talking about history during a historic time. And I am enormously grateful for the support given to these talks by the Sutton Civic Society and Enjoy Sutton. Enjoy Sutton is, we've got a fantastic high street. There are over 500 businesses and groups that use the high street as their base inside Sutton, and it is great that the team there actually value the role of heritage within inside the Sutton and the way it can bring people in to our community. I'm also very grateful for the support and encouragement of the Sutton Civic Society. Sutton Civic Society acts really as a critical friend to the borough, to the council, being able to promote the proper and good development of Sutton as a civic community, for architecture, for amenities, etc. Well, I am also very keen that you should be aware that anything that we're doing, any of the concepts that I talk about, whether it's revolutionary changes like transport, are all going to be covered by different topics within inside Sutton College's curriculum. They have a fantastic set of resources, and I'm very, very pleased to point you in their direction because Sutton College, if you want to learn more, then go to Sutton College, and they've got all the materials to help you and courses to help you really delve into some of the topics that I talk about. Now, this is going to be something of a ramble. I may bounce around my slides as my notes take me in different ways. I am talking about here really a topic that takes me outside of the churchyard. I'm going to ramble beyond the boundaries of the church and look into the wider parish. But many of the names that I may mention actually, and prominent names like James Sanksay, are intimately tied up with the history of St. Nicholas. St. Nicholas is the parish church, is at the heart of the community. It tells the long story of Sutton very, very well. And many of the topics that we hit on here are actually tied into whether it's the development of new buildings, new churches, new whatever, and monuments. It's all part of St. Nicholas's history as well. But let's put this into the wider context of really Sutton as a developing community on the edge of London. Now, the medieval parish of Sutton, the manor of Sutton, is about 3 miles long and it's about 1 mile wide. It slopes towards the downs from its northern border with a typical typical height above sea level of around 35 meters. It would take less than an hour to walk to the south of Sutton, which rises to 110 meters above sea level. So you can see that we're on a slope as a parish. And the southern boundary is less than 12 miles away from London. So from 110 meters above sea level, the horizon would be about 22 miles away. That means that somebody walking in the fields up on the downs at the end of the parish, at the rise of the down, really would be able to see over the open fields and downland, and you would see the smoke on the horizon. You would see London on the horizon, and that's certainly clear from the early modern period. People report that they can see London. They're aware of it, and ever since the building of St. Paul's Cathedral, the new St. Paul's with the massive dome, that's been visible from the southern end of the parish. We can actually go up into our bedrooms and look northwards, and we can see it from our house. That you can see that. So it is something that is on the horizon, a giant that is on the horizon, and we mustn't imagine that somehow people didn't travel even in the earliest periods, because before the Reformation, you actually the traffic on lanes and roads to and from London would have been very, very heavy. Think about it. Everybody is on the road. Monks and nuns are on errands for their communities. Bishops and clergy are bound backwards and forwards to their lands, to their cathedrals, they're making parochial visitations. There are wandering students, singing pilgrims. There are priests who are itinerant preachers. There are, you imagine that there would be pilgrims with script bags and banners and noise. There would be soldiers, discharged soldiers as well, beggars. There would be highwaymen, there would be crime, but there would be an awful amount of sheep and cattle on the roads, on the way to market, constantly being driven from one place to another, actually fouling the already foul footpaths and roads that we have. So if we were to go to Sutton, in the heart of Sutton, into the village, and think, where are we? How close to London are we? Well, from Sutton to Whitehall, to the statue of Charles I in Whitehall, then we are 11.5 miles away, or 12 miles away from the Royal Exchange, and this is the road that is you can imagine as a continual road, which is the London Reigate and then Brighton Road, and that's when we come on to that. We'll be talking about the turnpike concept of the road there as well, and even on unmade roads, it's only 3 miles walk to the City of London on a fine day. I've done that walk in the past. I've walked in about 3 hours to get up to Southwark Cathedral at the beginning of London Bridge. Merchants would have been able to move backwards and forth between their residences in the city, their city chambers and their country houses. It's something that even during the turnpike, even before the turnpike roads started to improve things in the 18th century, a good day's travel could see someone make 25 miles a day very, very easily. So going into where we are, sort of, let's keep on this slide for the moment. Where we are within the medieval period, so the early modern period, imagine from Henry VIII onwards, with the Tudor dynasty. From around 1555, the parish became the administrative unit for poor law provision. Authority this is part of there's the centralizing idea. Actually, this was a centralizing policy, because prior to that, it used to be the lords of the manor who had a lot of local administrative and court responsibilities. But the Tudors moved away from relying on the idiosyncrasies of the lords, who had their own power base, through to commissioners like church wardens, who were absolutely dependent on the king for their authority. So they suddenly had a new group of people with their own independent responsibilities, with their own independence authority as well. And church wardens were given a lot more authority on things like the administration of the poor law, but also on the administration of roads. Prior to the Reformation, you had a lot of individuals wanting to give money for roads because of pilgrimage, because it was seen as a way of helping the common good, and so it was very much reliant on charity. Now it was starting to be something that it was the responsibility of the local church wardens to make sure that people were pulling their weight. But by 1555, you have to understand the roads were really quite shocking. If you think about our own experience of what a good road was, which was Staines Street. Staines Street was up at the north end of the parish, and this is the Stonecott Hill that we imagine. Staines Street running from London Bridge all the way down to Chichester, and you've got the issue that nobody was repairing a country road like that, even though it was the King's Highway. And what would happen is, and it's quite evident that even as the things were moving backwards and forwards from Merton Abbey to Nonsuch Palace, as Merton Abbey was being demolished to build Nonsuch Palace in the 1550s, what was happening was that you had basically a big swathe of muddiness that was the road, and by the times that the commissioners came to work on the turnpike roads in the 1750s, they actually reinstated the road off the line of the Roman road, because they'd lost it. It was buried under the mud and the turf and the filth and the ruts of the road. Sorry about that. That's like sort of local disturbance there, but the repair of roads was the responsibility of church wardens, and it's suddenly, if somebody was wanting to use the roads, it would suddenly be a very, very expensive business. So, for example, in 1599, when the plan for Queen Elizabeth to visit Nonsuch came about, she was going to bring the court to Nonsuch Palace. They surveyed the route, and they brought it through from Wimbledon to Nonsuch via Kingston, and had identified lots of different decayed places on the route, and the church wardens there got stung for a very, very big bill, and with the responsibility to ensure that the road was suitable for 300 carts of baggage between Kingston Wimbledon and Nonsuch, and that was down to the Kingston church wardens. But getting into our period, getting into really when Sutton was starting to grow, we have lots of different evidence that Sutton was not quite a stone's throw away from London, but it was a realistic journey because you had two bits of evidence, really. 1637, you have the first evidence of regular transport to London, which was public transport. So there was a carter that used to, or a carriage service that brought things up from Reigate to London, publicly available for people to go themselves or put their own goods on. That was transported every Thursday from 1637. You had you had a relationship between Sutton and London that was visible. You saw London, you might trade in London, you might have commercial contacts in London, and we have nice little things from the 17th century as well, later in the 17th century, in 1691, for example, children being apprenticed into London. There was a Robert Gray from Sutton in the county of Surrey, who was bound to William Abbott for 7 years, so that he would have been apprenticed. And you also had the chalk pits in Sutton being carted up. And we've got evidence from really the time of the building of Nonsuch Palace that that there was a lot of carting trade, road trade, being drawn on from Sutton, and you had then evidence of the lime for St Paul's Cathedral being produced in Sutton. To give you a sense of how realistic that was, in 1801, the timetable for for somebody who perhaps is heading out to Reigate for business, they could get up in 1801 and catch the 7 a.m. Coach. The 7 a.m. coach would then stop at Sutton at 9 o'clock, and you'd have breakfast in Sutton before continuing. And even if you were going all the way down to Brighton, it would be a 12-hour journey. That's 60 miles down to Brighton. But it was still something that people could do, and they would look on it as a day's journey to get there. And that realistic sense of travel. This was after 1755 when the turnpike roads started to be built. That was a big watershed, really. It's one of the pivotal events, the turnpike roads. But the nature of the easy commute to London wasn't just look at the evidence that we've got children from Sutton being apprenticed into London. You've also got crime, where it's so reasonable to come down to Sutton for business that people can use that excuse as a fraud, for fraud. So, for example, on the 15th of September 1779, a chap called John Piers was indicted for feloniously stealing a black mare to the value of £5, the property of Samuel Finch, on July the 2nd. So the victim of the crime, John Finch, told the court, "I lost a black mare on the 2nd of July. It was kept in my stables in Brick Street. I let her to hire for that day to the prisoner to go to Sutton in Surrey. He said he was to return at 8 at night. He did not return it with me. I asked him where he lived. He said number 25 King Street, that he lodged there. I went next day to this place to inquire after him. There was no such man to be met with. I heard afterwards that my mare was sold on the same day at Smithfield." And so that is a crime that's recorded within the online records of the Old Bailey. And it's very likely that John Pears would have been executed for that theft. And all crimes like that, there's a need for them to be publicly seen so that everyone sees that the crime has been committed. And even Little Sutton had its own gallows. Our gallows were up on the Common. not on the road, but facing it. The site is supposed to have been at the entrance of what is now Sutton Cemetery, and you can basically imagine where it is. If you know where the plough is on Sutton Common Road, if you stood in the doorway of the plough inn looking towards the cemetery, you would have seen the gallows, and the gallows were supposedly, I don't know whether this is true or whether this is just sort of legend, but there were 4 elm trees that were growing together in a square, and the gallows would have been rigged up on those trees to provide a very good hanging platform. And one day, in 1768, 3 men were hanged on Sutton Common, and after they were dead, or as they were dying, this is the 21st of April, some men appeared with a hearse, a flatbed truck, flatbed cart with their horses and coffins. And they said that they were the friends of the men come to claim their bodies. But the crowd that had gathered, because a good hanging brings a good crowd, and I can always imagine that there's somebody selling nuts or the equivalent of sort of fried peas or something like that to entertain the crowd as they watched people jiggle at the end of the rope. But when these men were dead, the carters with the coffins said, "Can we have the bodies? Because they're our friends." The crowd actually took umbrage at this, because they worked out and they challenged the men, and eventually managed to extract a confession from the men that they weren't the men's friends. They were in fact agents for surgeons who wanted the bodies for anatomy. So the men were chased away, and the bodies of the 3 men were then taken to Kingston Church and buried in Kingston. That gives you a sense of the nature of where roads were, the fact that you've got the world really of Sutton starting to grow. And what I'm talking about, if we jump on here, you can see some of the roads that we have inside Sutton. This is looking at a map of Sutton Common. You can see, by the way, there's Sutton Common, and if I hover the mouse over, it's basically the double T of the double T of where my mouse is at the moment, the double T where it says Sutton up there. That's probably where the gallows were, so on a nice crossroads area, so in the field, so anyone passing those 4 ways will be able to see the bodies hanging there. But if I put this into the context of Sutton as a community and Sutton growing, we had between 1680 and 1689, and Sutton was growing during the 17th century. But at the end of the 17th century, you had, in 10 years, you had 10 people born, 10 people die. So 10 baptisms, 10 burials. 100 years later, and we know this because Samuel Lissons wrote his book, The Environs of London, and he came to Sutton and he saw that in between this is after 30 years after the Turnpike Trust had started to improve the road, and so between 1780 and 1789, we'd seen 16 baptisms and 12 burials. So there's more people starting to come into Sutton, but it's what's interesting is that Samuel Lissons surveyed and said that there were 100 houses in Sutton. So there was around about 100 houses. We know that in 1811, the village of Sutton had 638 inhabitants. Over half were involved in agriculture. The railway, and this is where I can drop back onto just the first. This is not the first station, but this is an early station of Sutton. When the railway arrived and it first arrived from Croydon in 1645. In 1845. What am I saying? 1645, 200 years earlier. 1845, the railways arrived, and we'd had a population of in 1811 of 638. By 1851, the population had increased to 1,387. Give it another 10 years. In 1861, the population became 3,186. So the railways had arrived then, but actually pumped water, would not arrive until 1864, and the mains aren't going to be properly put in until 1871. And it's 1871, the population is 6,558. And from Church's directory, estimates there are about 1,550 houses. So from the Listens survey in around about 1792, there had been 100 houses. In 1880, so less than 100 years later, the number of houses had increased by 15 times. Massive growth, largely driven by London being on the horizon, and people just pouring in to be able to get to London. Now, what about things like the actual travel and responsibilities for doing different things? So each parish, if we go back into this sense of the medieval parish, each parish was compelled by statute to maintain its own roads. And this was if I jump across to jump across to here. Each parish, Sutton, Carshalton, Cheam, was responsible for maintaining the roads in its parish. And it did that by the levying a charge to everyone who was a landowner or a tenant, and they would be responsible for carrying out the work. Chances are they would pay what's called a composition. They would pay a fine to the surveyors of the parish, and then the surveyors of the parish would carry out the work that was needed. There would be other charities that people could draw on. Remember, pre-Reformation, people left money because repairing roads was seen as a charitable act. Sutton benefited actually from a merchant tailors charity called the James Wilford Charitable Bequest, and it got a princely sum of £10 every 3 or 4 years. The records are not quite clear as to whether it's every 3 or 4 years, for the amendment of the highways. And that dated from 1514, because it was originally made for parishes in Kent and Sussex to repair roads that were noxious and in decay. And even in the early 1700s, on the charity board inside St. Nick's Church, you'll see Elizabeth Stevens actually giving £200 towards beautifying the church and keeping the footpaths in repair. So there's quite a bit of interest for charitable and donations to try and make sure the roads are good. But Actually, in 1711, people were writing that the roads were shocking. A gentleman called John Topland wrote in 1711, Sutton and Cheam are too dirty for riding, as Walton and Headley are too windy. Cobbett, who I've mentioned in some of my earlier talks, he in his rural rides in 1823 says that the road from London to Reigate through Sutton is about as villainous a tract as England contains. It was pretty horrible. So in 1755, Parliament passed 3 acts to create turnpike roads in the Epsom district. This is where we can sort of jump ahead and start looking at the idea of what were the roads that were being put in here. And so the Parliament passed 3 acts to create turnpike roads in the Epsom district. The roads between Sutton and Reigate and Sutton and Ewell were included to be widened and improved. They were widened and improved. These were existing roads. They were not brand new roads. And they were under the responsibility for the Reigate Trust, Toll Road Trust, and they would meet occasionally at the Greyhound Inn in Sutton. I'll show you a picture of that in a moment. And the rector of Sutton, Reverend James Sanksay, was requested by the trust to prepare toll gates and as soon as possible. And there's a sort of an edge to this in that yes, the roads were being improved, but the trust would erect gates across many tracks and paths leading into the high street, basically to cut off traffic on some of the side roads in order to force traffic onto the toll roads. So they had that permission to drive people to use the improved roads. So, for example, there was what is Manor Lane and I should be able to show you this. This is what a toll bar looked like. If I'm jumping too far ahead, and there we are. This is the slide that I want. I apologise on the orientation of this. I need to redraw it, I think, but this is from a history of Sutton. But you notice that there's a road there called Whiffle Lane. What a wonderful name, leading off to the Rythe. That's basically Westmead Road, Lower Road, and Whiffle Lane. Before it, because Westmead Road and Lower Road were pushed in, that was Manor Lane. So Manor Lane coming out there and eventually going towards the Lower Road to Carshalton. That had a toll bar put it across it, and these toll bars basically you're in the business of shutting off access into the high street, forcing people to use the roads, and they would have the signs up as to say what were the rules around who could use it. Pedestrians walking would not be charged. It was only people carrying a load would be carded, and they would be really quite vigorous. The trust was vigorous, and the rector James Sanksay was part of this as well. But you could see local landowners and tenants who allowed somebody to just come off the road to go round through their field on a track and then pop back onto the roads again, avoiding the toll bars, would be prosecuted because they allowed carriage over their land to evade tolls. And there used to be, if you think about the A232, that's the Cheam Sutton Carshalton Road, that's part of the old chain of roads that stretch from Croydon all the way. There's a chain of old roads that go all the way to Guildford, and that's why it was included in the 1755 toll road acts, toll bar acts, to include it as one of the roads within Sutton. Then there were only a couple of houses on the roads. If I see if I can get to the map, show you on here. There's nothing between Sutton and Cheam apart from you can see there's Lower Cheam, which was one of the houses, and then there's another one which was described as a stone house opposite what I suppose it's really underneath the houses in Landseer Road. It's opposite what was opposite what is now the Sutton Cricket Green, more or less where Gander Green Lane emerges onto the Cheam Road. And the Cheam, Gander Green Lane is an interesting thing because that for a long time was an unimproved road. It was a green lane, and it had wide green verges. It had deep ditches, and we had several ditches in Gander Green Lane, and it's still quite a wide road, Gander Green Lane. If you have in the autumn, it was a road used to walk flocks of geese and ducks from Kingston to Croydon to market, and the reason why those sorts of drovers taking geese to market would choose the green lanes because they had the water, they had the grass to feed the birds on the way. And that driving of geese was still happening as late as the 1880s, according to anecdote. Anyway, but certainly when the road was improved from Sutton to Ewell, the chap called Reverend Northey from Ewell and Sanksay from Sutton, they were given £200 to basically make it happen, make sure the roads were improved. And very much you've got different driving forces within the 18th century as to why this was happening. In Carshalton, you had a lot of industrial pressure. The Wandle was one of the most heavily industrialized areas in England, and you had a lot of pressure from the industrialists wanting to improve the roads. In the case of Sutton and in Cheam, that was mostly to do with commercial and recreational travel. So you had the rise of Epsom as a destination. You had the Spa appearing there. So Epsom Spa became very fashionable from 1618 onwards. And you had in the early 18th century, so in the 1700s, it became the resort of Queen Anne and other nobility. The Derby, also at Epsom, was an amazing driver to why the roads were improving, why people were doing that, even though this is an event that really was only a once a year event, 10 days celebration around the Derby, here the races at Epsom. And that started in 1780 and really started to grow and grow and grow. Now, I'm leaving on this map for a while because I want to start to look at the fact that this is showing a Sutton Lane. If the road south of Sutton is Sutton Lane. We call it the Brighton Road now. It's something that Sanksay and the other members of the trust in 1756 started to put into repair. There was still the engraving of the toll gates that I put up earlier on, somewhere in here. There we are. That's actually from that's actually the toll gate that was sketched on the toll gate that was on the I think that's on the Sutton Lane, and so there was one on there that stayed until 1882. The trust was wound up, but basically from the 1864, I'll explain why that it started to be completely irrelevant. It started to be completely impossible to really hold an income. But Sutton, from really another driver was was not just the Epsom connection, but probably more importantly, you had the connection of Brighton being a real driver, and we know that you probably know that you've got the Cock in Sutton, which is really a preservation of a name of a coaching inn that stood there. 1790, you have the coaching inn being illustrated, and you can actually see here you've got the toll bar integrated with the sign of the Cock. So there's the Cock Inn. This is a very famous one. Looking at you can see the coaches arriving there. You've got and the Cock was a major destination in Sutton. You can't pick up a guidebook about the early development of the London Reigate Brighton run without understanding that everyone stopped at the Cock because it was the best coaching inn. Certainly in the area. The other one was the Greyhound, and there's the Cock as it continued. But if we look down to where we have here, there was the Greyhound earlier on. The Greyhound stood in the High Street opposite West Street. And I've mentioned the Bourne Watercourse before, the Bourne Watercourse, which runs from Cheam via different things like the Diver's Ditch and the Boney Hole, all the way through to you had the Blackwater, and in West Street you had Diver's Ditch was in West Street, and you had the pump, the water that they drew for the Greyhound Inn came from the Bourne. So it's on the watercourse there. So you start to understand why things are in certain places. Now, the Cock is here, and if I just remind us of the lane, I want to get to here, show you on this map. Just as a diversion, I've mentioned earlier on, I started talking about the crimes. There are more than some things are not crimes, but you don't necessarily want to tell people about. They're not polite. But as the roads developed, have a look on the map here. This is a map from a chap called Rock. It was drawn in. It was drawn in 1762, but it was published in 1768. There was a property which we know as a Sutton Lodge, but notice on the map, it's not called Sutton Lodge, it's called Little Hell. Sutton Lodge, in the history of Sutton Lodge, it was built by a chap called John Wells. He's a maltster, so he's a brewer. He's making beer. This is a refreshment stop that he's in. So sometime it had been built around 1755. So it attaches to the arrival of the Turnpike Road. This is knowing that this is going to be the equivalent of a motorway. This is an 18th century motorway that he knows is coming. So he builds his place, and it was originally he called it on the, if you like, the label on the door is South Downs House, but nobody knew it as South Downs House, and they only knew it as Little Hell. And this is an era of when you had things like the Hellfire clubs. So this is probably, being a brewer, being a place, and he had a well, so he had access to water. This is possibly an alternative stopping point for travellers requiring a more discreet service and type of refreshment than offered at the regular establishments of the Cock and the Greyhound. So basically, I think this was likely to be the local sex and drinking club, and consequently it had the name Little Hell. Now, life didn't stay the same. You had all these toll toll roads. They served their purpose. You had the toll gates, but toll gates were not popular. People hated them. In Wales, with the toll gate trusts, toll bar trusts, you had the Rebecca riots. You've got instances in Surrey of all over Surrey, toll bars and toll gates being broken down. And you have to understand that the railway arrived in Sutton in 1845. And this was the year, the same year that the manor was bought by a chap called Thomas Alcock. Thomas Alcock knew what was happening. He was in a new generation. He knew what was happening. So in 1845, the first railway line arrived. That was the line from Croydon. Another line would be opened up in 1868. That was the Mitcham, Streatham and Tulls Hill line. He knew that what was coming was to change things. In 1880, in Church's Directory, the advertised time to London Bridge is 25 minutes. He knows that the toll bars and the whole idea of coaching is dead. Even though pump water only came in 1864. But in 1845, Thomas Alcock, and I don't think he was a person to really care about this is the way it's always been done, this is what you should do. He actually started building new roads deliberately himself for property development. And so if you have new roads appearing in Sutton, and we might have a map of, get back to my map of Sutton, the lanes, there you go. That was the old world, but he's starting to drive in new lanes, which are, whether it's Ringstead Road on the edge of Carshalton, or whether it's the things like the building in all those roads, like you can see the regular patterns, Sutton Grove, Carshalton Grove. These are the roads near me. That you've got new roads being driven in. The development of the Ben Hill estate. He's putting in roads every 100 yards or so, building blocks, looking to develop property. And that meant you had all these cut-throughs. And he was so adamant that when he arrived, he had found on some of his properties these gates that had been padlocked shut for 40 years by the Turnpike Trust, and he just had his men hack them off. He went to war with the Turnpike Trust. And this period, and this is where we're almost coming to the end of the session, because the railway changed the fortunes of local businesses. I described the importance of things like the Cock Inn and 20 carriages a day coming, and it's difficult to imagine actually the impact of so many carriages. You have descriptions of how 20 carriages a day going backwards and forwards. These are coaches, not carriages. These are, leaving aside the private individuals and the private houses, but the post coaches, 20 each way a day passing through Sutton. Massive amounts of horses being needed, lots of trade. The railways to change that. One thing that it changed is that you've got descriptions, again in Church's Directory, of how on Angel Hill, and that Angel Hill was the cutting in Angel Hill was putting in 1825. People would sound the horns. There was almost through Sutton, there was a regular blaring of that. And in May, I can't imagine what it would have been like, because the because the mackerel trade coming up from the south coast came through Sutton as well. So in May, late spring, early summer, when mackerel is a seasonal fish, you'd have wafts of fish smells coming through Sutton with the regular sound of the coaching horns. But the railway changed all that. It moved everything off into the lines, into the cuttings, into the embankments. You might hear the sound of the train, but you wouldn't have the coaching horns in the same way. And it would give you a sense of the dramatic sense. By 1866, because in the short period between 1845, when the first railway came, and 1866, when a new landlord of the Cock Inn took over, there were only 2 horses left. There were 2 carriages, one basically a little trap and the other 2 carriages. But by 1880, after the second railway line had come in, he'd actually increased this so that he had 20 cabs running from the Cock Inn. 20 cabs, that's horse-drawn cabs, servicing the commuters. So there's a very dramatic change taking place. So a huge change to the nature, really, of the parish, nature of how Sutton changed, and really set the scene. So you've got you've got this realization that transport built Sutton, transport revolutionized Sutton, but it was really the driver of London being so close that was at its heart. And there was the further pump of the local amenities of Epsom, and then down the line to Brighton, that was the, if you like, the commercial drivers for Sutton's growth. Okay, I'm more or less at the end of my ramble. Thank you very much for listening. If you want to know any more about these topics, whether it's holiday in Brighton, or whether the development of travel and transport, then do check out Sutton College's history and culture classes. That'll take you on for all different types of tangents as well. Next time, I've got a short session coming up on Thursday. That will be a short session all about the agricultural traditions of Sutton, and some of the traditions specifically associated with Ascension Tide and Rogation Sunday. So we'll be talking about that. But in the meantime, thank you very much for giving me your attention on this. I hope you have enjoyed this. I've intended to educate you, to entertain you as well. But so long, Sutton, your history.